Today is January 20, 2015. I'm Jean Richardson, and I'm here with Marlene Ciorba, who has attended rural school. Marlene, thank you so much for doing this for us. Tell us where and when you attended country school.
I attended country school in northern Iowa, in Winnebago County, which would be straight north of Fort Dodge, toward the border. In Grant Township, the school I went to was called Grant Number 9.
And how many years did you go?
I went first through fifth grade.
And it was all at this Grant Number 9.
Yes.
How far away did you and your family live?
Well, we moved during the time that my older siblings went to country school. So we lived about a half a mile away, and then we moved to a different farm. So by the time I went in first grade, we were about 3/4 of a mile from school.
And they went to a different school?
No, same school.
It was always the same school, okay. Yes. But within that
Right.
distance, okay. Do you remember any task you had to perform before leaving for school?
I discussed this with my sisters, and we don't remember that we had to do anything other than get up, eat breakfast, and get dressed and go to school when our mother told us it was time to go.
Okay. And do you remember what you wore to school?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes. We have, again, my sisters and I have a little differing thoughts on that. My recollection is I had 2 dresses, and I wore them, Monday, Wednesday, Friday I wore one, and Tuesday, Thursday I wore the other. My sister thinks we might have had 3 dresses, but regardless, our wardrobe was very limited. We also wore brown stockings in the winter with our dresses, and when it was warmer, of course, we didn't have to wear stockings. Then we wore white socks, white anklets.
Any more recollections about winter clothing?
Yes, we wore snow pants because we had to walk to school, and we wore some sort of a boot. I would call it an overshoe, and it probably was a 4-buckle overshoe or a 3-buckle overshoe. Perhaps it had a zipper toward the end of that time period, but they definitely were overshoes that we wore over our regular shoes.
Approximately what time did you leave for school?
We left when my mother told me to, but my sister said she thought school started at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And we probably left at 8:30.
Okay. And so you had sisters to walk with all the time?
I always had a sibling to walk with, yes.
How many sisters did you have?
I have three sisters that went to country school and 1 brother, and I was the youngest.
Do you remember anything about those walks?
Yes.
Tell us.
Yes. Well, it was obviously a country road, and I remember mostly going home from school, because going home from school, we dilly-dallied along and took as much time as we wanted to drive walking home. What I remember most is in the spring and in the fall, later in the fall, there were wild roses, which is our Iowa state flower, and they are growing wild in the ditches, and I would go down and look at them, and actually they're still blooming there, because I took a picture last summer of these roses blooming in the ditch on the way to country school.
And what was it in the fall that you remember?
Oh, I think we ran, my sister's, I have one sister who's 2 years older than I am, and then we had one other girl who went to our school those last years. She was a year younger than me. And we would run, we'd race each other, and we would talk, and we would laugh, and we'd climb through the ditches, and we would, we were never in much of a hurry to get home.
Okay. Please describe your schoolhouse and its surroundings.
Well, it was on a corner, like they all were in our area. I'm not sure if they were elsewhere, but in Grant Township, they were every 2 miles, and then they encompass a 4-mile square radius around the school. So the furthest anybody had to walk was 2 miles to school. Ours was a white building, had steps leading up to it, had a bell tower. It was on a fairly good-sized corner lot. had bushes along the edges that were mulberry bushes, which had berries that stained your clothes. I distinctly remember that. And then we probably had a couple big trees too. I don't really remember, but I'm sure there were. And then there was a area out front that we played ball, softball, pretty much year round until the snow covered the diamond. But so it was a good. And then we had a teeter-totter, which my dad bought when they closed the school, and so we had it on our farm then for the rest of. In fact, I think it's still there. We had a teeter-totter and we had a slide, and that was the playground equipment.
So you did say a flagpole too, right?
Yes.
And outbuildings?
We did not have any outbuildings. We were more modern maybe than some. We had a toilet inside the school. Now it was like a septic tank underneath the school, so there was a toilet in the school, so we didn't have any outbuildings.
What years was this?
I would have gone in 1949, and then through 5 years through 54.
What was the first thing you did once you arrived at school?
I think we played. I'm sure we were allowed to be outside, and we probably played. We were a great group of ball players, and we probably played ball until the teacher told us it was time to come in, or we, ran around. But we were outside. I'm fairly sure. Unless it was really cold, I imagine we could come in.
What did you do first upon entering the schoolhouse?
We hung up our coats. We had in the beginning, or as you walked in the door, there was 2 cloakrooms, we called them. On the right-hand side was a girls' cloakroom, and on the left-hand side was a boys'. There was a toilet in ours. I don't honestly know if the boys came in and used the same toilet, or whether there was another, stool in the other side. I don't know. But we hung up our coats, put away our lunches, which we carried in tin pails, and put them in their shelves, I believe. And then I don't know whether we went directly to our desk. We probably did. We were very obedient children, so I imagine that was the routine.
Please describe the interior of the building.
What was one large room, but preceded by these 2 cloakrooms. So you walked in the front door, cloakroom on either side, and then straight in, and then it was one large room. Big windows on each side, and not on each side. The one side had the blackboard, so I don't think there were windows there, but on the other sides. And there was a blackboard across the front. We also had the alphabet across the top above the blackboard was the alphabet written in cursive and in print. And I think we had pictures of the president or past presidents, and
Maybe Lincoln
probably
in Washington?
that would be my guess. I don't remember, but my sister tells me we did, so
Okay.
we probably did. And I think we had a flag, a smaller flag inside that we pledged to.
A Victrola?
We did. We had music. It varied a little bit, but my sister was older. They used the Victrola for music class, and they played a record, and then we would sing with the record, or as she says, we would march around the room. So I don't remember that, but my recollection of music class was that we had it from KUNI, from the radio station. We had Songs of the Air, and I have the book yet from Songs of the Air. It was a red songbook, and it had maybe 50 songs in it, and we would sing with the radio station.
A piano?
No, we did not.
Sand table?
No.
What supplies did your school have? You had books?
We had books for, this is 1 through 8, so we had books for every grade. We had, there was a small library on the one side with, it really didn't have that many books in it, but we had a library, and we had, of course, desks, and we had a recitation bench, which was very common in those days too. The teacher had her desk, and then next to her desk was a bench that the children went up to recite their lessons one grade at a time.
Did you have slates?
I don't think so. I think we had Big Chief note paper that we brought. It had a red cover on it and loose, or flipped like that, and we were responsible for our own paper and pencils.
So anything else besides paper and pencils that your families would have provided?
Erasers, but that I can't think of anything else.
Crayons, maybe?
Oh, I'm sure we had crayons, yes. Crayons and scissors.
Scissors.
Yeah.
Ink? Did you ever get
We didn't use ink that I remember.
Okay.
There were ink wells in the desk,
Okay.
but we didn't use ink.
Okay. Where did you get those items?
We got them from the general store in Woden, which is the little town close by. Or we would go to one of the other surrounding towns, but it would be a general store type business.
What activities began the day once the students were at their seats?
We began with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would you have a song or a prayer then?
No. I don't recall any prayer or any religion in the school at all, although we are all, Christians. Many of us went to the same churches, so it wasn't like it wasn't allowed, but I don't recall having it.
Describe how the teacher organized the school's day's lessons.
When you're little, you don't pay much attention to that. All you do is when she says you do something, then you did it. But I imagine, since there was 1 through 8 grades, we started with, let's just say we started with reading. She would start with the youngest reader and work her way up, or the other way around. But while the one who was reading was in front on the recitation bench, the rest of us were at our desks doing reading to ourselves or doing some sort of activity. And then the same thing repeating with each subject.
Can you think at all how the day's experiences varied between the grade levels?
I don't really remember, but I would guess that the time that the youngest spent on the recitation bench would have been less than the older students. The advantage of that style of teaching was, I was the only one in my class for half the time, is that you could listen to the class below you and you could listen to the class above you, and it was a great way to learn extra material.
So most of the time you were the only one.
I had a classmate until first, second, and then I think he moved sometime during 3rd grade. And then I went through 5th grade and I was alone, the only student, only student in my class. The only girls in the school were my sister that was 2 years older and this neighbor girl who was 1 year younger.
So only 3 girls.
Yes.
So how many altogether in this school?
I would say it varied, but somewhere between 8 to 12.
Oh, you were outnumbered.
Yeah, yes.
Boy, you played a lot of ball.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you remember any lesson activities?
I remember doing what they called puzzle pages, which they may have been just busy work to keep us busy while the others were doing something. I don't know for sure, but I know I didn't like them because I considered them busy work, whether they were or not, but they were pieces of paper, like this, and then they would have little, like maybe it'd be a math, 1 + 4 =, and then you'd have to cut out 5 and paste it up there, and that cutting and pasting. And I thought that was a waste of time.
What were your favorite subjects?
Probably reading, but I liked school a lot.
Were there any that were your least favorite?
Well, probably puzzle pages,
Puzzle
which,
pages.
which really wasn't the class, but I know I didn't like those.
I was going to ask, did you interact much with others during your lessons? But if you were the only one for half the time, there's not much.
No, we didn't, and we definitely weren't allowed to talk. You know, if it wasn't your turn to be up in the front, or you know, if she was leading a general discussion, you didn't talk unless she called on you. And so we didn't, you know, interact with our fellow students. Even if I had a classmate, we wouldn't have been interacting, I don't think.
Did the teacher have any helpers?
Us.
And what
She
did you
had
do?
all of us. We loved to help the teacher. We did things like, the things that I remember now, because I was younger, is, you know, cleaning the board, going outside with the erasers and dusting the erasers out, you know, probably shutting the windows and, you know, straightening up the classroom. I believe that, and again, I was too young to notice this, but I believe that the older boys were responsible for bringing water to the school. And there was a farm just past the mulberry bushes that they would walk to. It was my uncle and aunt, and they would bring pails of water back. And I think that's kind of what the bigger boys did. As far as the heavier things like coal for the furnace or whatever, I think that was delivered by one of the parents.
What rules did your classroom have? No talking.
Just no talking, being quiet and respectful. I think, you know, it was a whole different era. People were respectful because we were taught to not talk unless our elders talked to us and said we could talk. But and pretty much that carried over. We were all pretty much raised the same way, and there wasn't, to my remembrance, there wasn't really any you know, class clowning around or anything like that. Probably at recess we might have, but not during the school day.
What discipline techniques did your teacher have to enforce?
I don't remember any
because they just followed them.
I don't remember any kind of discipline at all. Certainly not that I would have received. As my sister said, we knew better than to misbehave because we had siblings that would report it back home, so we were, you know, we were always behaving.
And cousins too?
We did have cousins. That family didn't have children, but we did, or the child was older, but we did have cousins that were there for about a couple of years that we were there.
So of these 9 to 12 children, maybe half of them might have been related to?
No,
Okay.
just one family that
Okay.
we would have been. And then they moved, so really after that, no relatives.
Okay. What were your how did you get the teacher's attention when you needed to ask a question?
Raised our hand.
Were you able to do that when she's working with the other children?
No,
You had to time it, right?
you had to wait, yeah.
How did you know it was time for lunch?
She told us. We were really teacher directed.
And you said you brought your lunch and
Yeah.
in a tin pail, and what was in your tin pail?
You know, I don't remember lunch at all, but my sisters say that we probably brought, my mother, we made all of our own bread, and they recall that it was homemade bread with jelly on it. And we probably drank water. I mean, the tin buckets had room for a thermos, but I don't think we brought anything in a thermos. And we probably drank water from the pail that the boys brought in.
Was everyone using the same dipper?
Oh yeah.
And the pails were kept in the...
I believe in the basement.
Oh, in the basement?
We had a basement.
Okay.
I guess I failed to tell you that at the beginning, but we had a furnace down the basement, and the way it heated the classroom was there was a big open grate that you could see directly into the basement. Of course, the fun part was you could also see directly up into the classroom, which, was kind of fun for kids to see what they could see up there. And but that was our source of heat.
Did you ever put a potato or something on this register?
No, we put our wet mittens on it though, and our wet clothes, particularly our mittens, I guess. If we'd have put all of our clothes on, we wouldn't have had any heat in the room. But we put our mittens on, and so it smelled, like in the winter, it was that wet wool, yucky smell from us trying to dry our mittens out.
When and where did you eat your lunch?
I think we ate at our desk, but I don't really recall. Maybe we ate outside when it was warm. I don't know.
How did your meals compare to those to the other students?
I think we all had pretty skimpy meals. No fruit, it was a sandwich, and that's probably all really we had, because it wasn't that the fruit didn't exist, but it was expensive, and so it wasn't, I'm sure we probably had apples during apple season, and we might have had, plums, and whatever we grew, we might have had in there. Carrots, we probably had carrots.
How long was lunchtime?
Till the teacher said it was over.
And you said you played ball.
Maybe a half an hour. I really don't know.
Okay. And you played a lot of ball.
A lot
Did
of
you ever do
softball.
anything at recess time, or mostly ball?
Mostly ball, and then we played, as soon as the snow came, we would play fox and goose, or we built snow forts. In the spring, we had, if it was muddy or wet, we had ditches that went around the between the road and the school. And one year, I remember doing this. This certainly would not be allowed now, but one of the 8th grade boys brought his horse to school. Perhaps he rode it regularly, I don't know, but he brought it to school, and somehow we cobbled together a raft out of wood that was around there, probably branches and trunks of trees, and anyway, somehow we got it all lashed together. Probably supplied by this 8th grade boy things to do, but anyway, we made a raft. And then we would take turns getting on the raft, and the horse would pull us down the ditch from one end to the other. Now you can imagine that eventually people got wet, but it was not outlawed. Our teacher allowed us to do that.
Did she play ball with you ever?
I think she did sometimes. It varied with the teacher, but my best recollection is my last one in 5th grade. And she was very student-oriented in terms of, she enriched our lives in a way that we had never had. She brought us games from home, like jacks and checkers, and we had never really played games because we were all working farm families, and you might have played ball at home, but you didn't necessarily have, we didn't have a lot of books, for example, even though we were avid readers, all of us. But we had, we played, but it was all creative play. And she taught us games like Monopoly and jacks and other board games, and she brought all these from home or from someplace. She also brought books from the library of the closest town that had a library. Like she'd bring a box of books in, and then we could read them. And my sister and I were discussing that, and we believe that we probably were not allowed to take those books home, that we probably had to read them in school.
How did the country school day end?
I don't remember if she rang the bell. If she did, it would have been just for a fact, because she would have said the day is over and we'd have left. But it might have rung the bell. We had, beside the big bell, we had a little desk bell. She might have rung that.
Do you remember any other time when she might have used the little desk bell?
Probably to call us back, like after lunch, I would guess.
Do you remember your teachers' names?
just two of them.
Okay, and their names were?
Miss Doden, Doden, and Mrs. Munson, Munson.
And Doden was 2 D's or one?
One.
Tell me about your two teachers. Was that this Mrs. Munson?
Mrs. Munson was the one that I remember the most. Now, of course, I was in 5th grade, so I was.
That opened the world to you?
She was, yes, she was a marvelous person and teacher, and she recognized us as girls, for one thing, you know, that we were a little different than the boys, and I can remember her commenting on my sister's hair. We went, you know, as you can see by the picture, I had braids, and Myrna wore braids too. And then when she got her hair cut, she had a perm at one point. And I remember the teacher commenting about it and saying, oh, you know, you look so nice with your hair like that, and things that, you know, we weren't used to any kind of recognition that we were girls, that we might be pretty in something, or it might be nice that we had a change. So she was wonderful. Miss Doden, I don't really remember anything about her other than that she was, I think she probably was about my 3rd grade teacher, I believe. And that she was strict, but they were all strict.
Where did your teachers live?
Again, I ran this past my sisters. We think that most of them were local girls that lived with their family and came, you know, that only lived a few miles away from the school. And I think that we're not sure. I know Fern said, well, do you ever remember a car being at the school? And I'm like, there could have been a car sitting on the steps practically, and I wouldn't have thought about a car being there, so I don't know. But I imagine that they walked if they were, you know, close, within 2 miles, or they might have had, you know, like their dad might have brought them, especially in bad weather, I would say.
How often did you see your teacher outside of the school day?
Never. None of them went to my church, you know, which really was my only other social place, was church. So you know, and we didn't go to town. My dad did most all the grocery shopping and would go, you know, which didn't mean that he went through the store and picked up things. At that era, you'd bring your list in, you would hand it to the store owner, you would go do your other business, and then you'd come back and it would all be in a box ready for you to take home. So Dad did most of that. And we only went to town on Saturday night in the summer because they had free movies in the park. And I probably wasn't every Saturday, but every so often. That's the only time I remember really, you know, going to town.
Now you helped the teacher with some upkeep of the classroom. Do you know if she had any help from parents?
I was so oblivious to any of that. I don't know. I mean, I think there was some sort of a school board, you know, people that were responsible for hiring the teacher, you know, making sure there was coal, you know, buying whatever needed to be bought. But I don't really know anything about that. It just, in my mind, happened behind the scenes, and it didn't apply.
So you went to 5th grade, so no kindergarten, first through 5th. So
there was not kindergarten in our
so
school.
we've got 5 years of school, then so as a 6th grader you go to town school.
Yeah.
What kind of change was that for you?
That was like night and day. I went to Buffalo Center, and Buffalo Center was a consolidated school. It had within the building, it had kindergartners through senior. And I was in 6th grade, and there were 2 classrooms, so we had about 40 kids or so in 2 classrooms. And that's really when I first discovered that boys were kind of interesting, because there were lots of them and I'd never seen them before. And I guess from what I hear, later from the kids, the town kids were real interested in these country kids who came in because they hadn't seen them before either. And so you had kind of this little wave of popularity because you're a new student. And it was a self-contained classroom. And it was just, twice as many kids as what I was used to having. There was, of course, school lunch. There was riding the bus. Everything about it was new and different and probably scary. I don't remember being scared, but it probably was.
Did your country school close, or did you move?
Yes, closed.
The school closed.
Yeah, that was in, so it would have been about 1954. And I believe the year that ours closed, many schools closed, or maybe it was 55. But anyway, that was probably the majority of the country schools closed in that time period within a year or two. And then there were some that were open in the more rural areas, I believe, longer, but I don't know how long.
Do you remember anything about community politics affecting the operation of your school?
You probably can already guess. No, I didn't. We did not, to my knowledge, get a newspaper except Sunday. I think we got a Sunday paper because I remember my mother reading the cartoon comics to us. The news that we got, my dad was an avid radio listener, so we listened to the local radio station, which would have been Algona, about 20 miles away. And he listened to the farm news, which would have been Herb Planbeck, that's not quite right, out of Des Moines, who was on for, probably 50 years. He would listen to that. On Sunday, we would listen to the old, not us kids, but Dad listened to the music, the polkas and I forget what it was called. There was a particular program that he would listen to, and it had polkas and waltzes and music. And he liked to listen to that, and we weren't allowed to talk during that, so we'd always go outside. In fact, we weren't allowed to talk in the home anytime the radio was on that Dad was listening to it. But I never listened, so I don't really know what important things were being said.
You talked about the community being involved with the school when you talked about the board and hiring teachers. Any other ways the community would have been involved with your school?
Well, I think that most of the families that lived in our little section had children. There was only one family that didn't have children that went to school when I was there. We had at the end of the year we had a school picnic, and Fern, my sister, reminds me that it didn't matter if it was in the middle of planting, which it would have been. All the farmers stopped what they were doing and came to the school picnic, which was, I think we had ice cream brought in from the little local town ice cream shop, and we had, it was the end of school, and it was a happy, fun day. The other thing we did is we had, in the fall, we had a we had a program, like a play, I guess, sort of like a play. And I don't remember this happening in my time, but I know it did when my sisters, we had a box social with that. I asked her who made the box lunches, and I said, did you ever make one? No, she didn't make one. But she thought that the kids could have, the girls could have, but she did. And I don't know who really provided those box lunches, because there weren't really that many people, around, but she remembers that happening. And maybe that died out, because there weren't enough people to have a box. But we had that, and then we had a Christmas program. And that was, we sang songs and we strung a sheet up across the front of the in front of the teacher's desk, and then that was where we'd come out from behind the curtain and talk. And I remember singing a little song. Kookaburra sits on an old gum tree. You know that one? I sang that one year.
As a solo.
As a solo, which was then really scary because I don't really have a solo voice, but then nobody did. So, but anyway, I sang that one year. The other thing I remember doing one year is and I'm sure I decided I was going to do this, and the guy would just let me, because I gave this little poem about it's hard to be a farmer. And are you familiar with that? It's hard to be a farmer, and this I ought to know, for I tried to raise some chickens, and the darn things wouldn't grow. And the folks at home, they laughed and laughed, but I didn't see what was such fun. I planted a whole handful of feathers, and not a chicken, not one. That was my piece.
When you left school at the end of the day, what did you finally
When I finally got home,
What did
we
you
had
do?
lunch. We did. My mother always had lunch for us. And my favorite, of course, is when she would make, my mother made all of our bread, but once in a while she would make cinnamon rolls. And that was my favorite. You knew you were getting them when you'd walk up the lane, you could smell them. And we would have, cinnamon roll and milk. But otherwise we had cookies and milk. Always milk.
So no chores?
Yes, we did. It depended upon the age that you were, but we fed the chickens, we gathered the eggs, we helped with the milking, we, fed the pigs and I carried a lot of buckets of grain from these little grain sheds into the chickens and into the hogs. And